It was supposed to be a normal day, just another woman in a crowded room, waiting in line, quiet and unnoticed. She looked simple, dressed plainly, no jewelry, no makeup, nothing to suggest who she really was. The security staff barely glanced at her as they motioned for her to hand over her ID. She did it without a word, calm, polite, even a little shy. One of them chuckled under his breath, nudging the other. Probably a housemaid or someone's assistant. One muttered, loud enough for her to hear. She didn't react. But then, something unexpected happened. As soon as the scanner read her ID, the machine made a strange sound, then froze. A second later, an automated voice echoed from the system, loud and clear. Access granted. Lieutenant Commander, clearance level. Classified. The room went silent. The laughter stopped. Cold. One guard dropped the ID. Another took a step back, eyes wide, trying to make sense of what they just heard. How could this soft-spoken, ordinary-looking woman hold such a high rank? The whisper started immediately. Some thought it was a mistake. Others stared at her like they were seeing her for the first time. But she stood still, not proud, not smug, just composed, as if this reaction was nothing new. She slowly picked up her ID from the floor, met their eyes, and simply said, "Is there a problem?" The tension in the air was sharp. And just when you think it couldn't get more surprising, something even bigger was about to be revealed. Something that would leave the entire room speechless. Stay with us to find out what happened next. The room felt frozen, as if time had slowed down around her. The guards exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do next. One of them tried to speak, but his voice cracked under the pressure. Number? One had expected this, not from her. She didn't look like someone who carried classified clearance or military rank. But the system didn't lie. Neither did her calm confidence. People around began whispering. Passengers paused mid-step, trying to understand what they'd just heard. Some pulled out their phones, not to film, but to check who this woman really was. The name on her ID didn't ring any bells for them. No headlines, no viral fame. Somehow, she carried authority that silenced even the most skeptical. She wasn't there to prove anything, but the air around her was starting to shift. One of the senior officers arrived, called in quietly by the front desk. He walked up quickly, glanced at the ID, then at her, and his face changed instantly. His posture straightened. "Ma'am," he said with a stiff nod, his voice lower and more careful than before. That one word sent another wave of confusion through the room. The younger guards didn't know whether to apologize, salute, or disappear. But she just looked at the officer and nodded slightly, still keeping her words minimal. There was something hauntingly strong about her silence, like she had seen and lived through things none of them could imagine. What had she done before this day? Why was her rank kept off the record? And what kind of missions gave someone that level of clearance while they remained hidden in plain sight? The answers were buried in a past only a few knew. And what she was here for today was far from. Overdot, as the officer quietly escorted her past the stunned crowd, whispers followed them like shadows. Some tried to guess her story, while others just stared, unsettled by how easily the situation had shifted. Behind closed doors, away from the public eye, the woman was led into a restricted lounge, one usually reserved for visiting diplomats or high-level operatives. But she didn't seem fazed. She moved like she'd been through it all before. Inside, the officer lowered his voice. "We weren't expecting anyone from your side today. You traveled without protocol." She looked at him for a moment, then replied, "That's exactly why I got here without being followed." There was something chilling in her tone-controlled but holding weight. He didn't ask more. He knew better. Back near the entrance, the guards who had mocked her were now being questioned. An internal review had already started. One of them, kept repeating, "We didn't know. We just didn't know." But ignorance wouldn't excuse protocol violations, not with someone of her clearance. The security chief reviewed the logs again. Her ID had triggered a system override 1. That only happened when deep-level identities were involved. That kind of clearance came with a reason, and reasons like that were rarely simple. Meanwhile, a man seated across the airport terminal had been watching the whole time. He had followed her discreetly since she arrived. He wasn't part of airport staff, he wasn't even on the flight list. He wore civilian clothes, blended in with the crowd, but his eyes had military training written all over them. He made a quick call without looking away from the lounge door. "She's here, but something's off. She's not following her usual pattern." Who was he? Was he tracking her or protecting her? And more importantly, what was she really here to stop? Outside the lounge, tension rippled through every level of security. The woman's unexpected appearance had triggered alerts far beyond the airport. Somewhere deep within a government building, a secure server logged her ID scan and sent out a silent red flag. Within minutes, a team of analysts began reviewing old files, most of which were sealed years ago. Her name wasn't just attached to military operations. It was tied to missions that never officially existed. Inside the lounge, she sat quietly, sipping water, her face calm but eyes focused. The officer who'd greeted her was now on a secure call, nodding silently as he received instructions. He glanced at her from across the room. "They want to know why you broke silence," he said carefully. She looked up, her voice steady. "Because there's something they missed. And if I'm right, it's already here." Across the terminal, the man still watching her received a second message. One word appeared on his screen. "Engage." His demeanor changed instantly. He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and began walking not toward her, but around the terminal, scanning faces, exits, patterns. If she was right, then she wasn't the only one who came in under the radar. Back at security, the logs revealed a second ID scan that had failed. Someone had tried to pass through a secure checkpoint minutes before her. The system didn't recognize it at the time, but now, looking closer, the codes were suspicious. It wasn't just a failed entry. It was a backdoor attempt, cloaked and deliberate. She stood, sensing the shift. Her eyes flicked to the hallway as if she felt the danger getting closer. The officer moved to block the door, but she stopped him. "Don't," she said quietly. "They're not after me, not directly. But if we're too late, they won't need to be." A sharp alarm suddenly rang through the terminal short. Not loud, but just enough to signal something had gone wrong. The officer's phone lit up with a red alert. He looked down, then straight at her. "Unauthorized data transfer detected. It's coming from inside the network." She didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped past him and headed toward the hallway, fast but steady. He followed, realizing now that she wasn't here by chance. She had come because she knew this was going to happen. As they moved, the man who had been shadowing her changed direction. He was now tracking someone else. Through his earpiece came a voice. "Unknown asset breached a comms node near Gate 12. Wearing staff badge. Possible disguise." He responded calmly, visual acquired. "Moving in." Meanwhile, the woman reached a secure access point. She placed her palm against the scanner. The door clicked open to a control room. Inside, a technician stood frozen, hands raised. He had been caught in the middle of something far bigger than him. On one of the screens, a live feed showed the suspect, dressed like a janitor, walking casually through the staff corridors, carrying a rolling bin that didn't match standard equipment. She scanned the system quickly. "It's not a solo operation," she said. "There's remote access feeding him instructions. Someone's watching from outside." Her voice dropped lower. "And they're not just stealing data. They're setting up a blackout." The officer looked at the screen, realization dawning. They're going to shut the grid down. Here, now. But before he could respond, another alert flashed. Not from the airport, but from a private airfield just 15 miles out. A second signature matching her clearance level had just been activated. She froze. "That's not possible," she whispered. "There's only one ID with that access." The officer stared at her. "Then who just used the other one?" Her heart pounded, but her face stayed unreadable. She stared at the alert on the screen. There was no mistaking its identical clearance code had just been used. That was impossible. Her ID had been locked and singular, uncopyable. Whoever activated that signal had either broken a system built to be unbreakable, or had once been given access for reasons long buried. She turned to the officer. "Track the signal." "I need eyes on that airfield now." He relayed the command. Within seconds, satellite visuals appeared. A private jet stood on the tarmac, engines hot. A man in a suit, back to the camera, was boarding. But just before stepping in, he looked uphand for a brief moment. His face was caught by the lens. She stepped closer, breath caught in her throat. "No," she whispered. "He's supposed to be dead." The officer looked at her in disbelief. "That's Commander Hale. He went missing 5 years ago, your last mission." Her hands tightened into fists. It wasn't a disappearance. It was a cover-up. He vanished with the prototype key, and now he's trying to activate the blackout protocol. Suddenly, the screen blinked red. A live command was initiated from the plane code locked to her biometrics. The system didn't reject it. It accepted it. He was using a cloned version of her ID. The airport grid began shutting down section by section. Lights flickered, communication lines dropped, and panic began rising in the terminal outside. Without waiting, she dashed toward the nearest exit. "Get me a secure vehicle en route to that airfield now," she ordered. The officer was already moving, calling backup, but nothing could match her pace. She had to confront him herself, not just to stop the breach, but to face the ghost. She thought she'd buried, but as she reached the gate, her phone buzzed once. A message. One line, "You're already too late." This was never about the airport. She stared at the message, breathing hard, the weight of it sinking in. The airport wasn't the real target, it was only the distraction. Somewhere else, something more critical was already in motion. Her mind raced through past files, old strategies, hidden links. And then it hit her. The data transfer wasn't about infrastructure, it was about identities. Hale hadn't come to destroy systems. He came to erase them, rewrite them, and control. What came next in the chaos of the shutdown? She rerouted through a side network old access point only a few operatives knew still existed. Within seconds, she located the central relay where Hale's cloned ID was running commands. One swift command from her shut the loop and forced a lockout. The system froze his control signal. The blackout halted mid-sequence, across the city. Lights steadied, alerts stopped, and power stabilized. She had cut him off just in time. The jet never left the ground. Interceptors reached the airfield before wheels could lift. Hale was taken into custody, expression unreadable, like a man who knew he'd only lost one round of a bigger war. She watched the arrest feed quietly, not celebrating, just relieved. Back at the terminal, things returned to order. The guards who had laughed at her never looked her in the eye again. She didn't need them to. Her silence had spoken louder than any rank ever could. As she exited quietly through a restricted door, the officer who had helped her walked beside her. "You going to disappear again?" he asked. She gave a faint smile. "Maybe. That's usually when I get the most done." And with that, she was just a simple woman to anyone watching. But behind that calm face was a force that stopped a disaster no one saw coming.